a low hill in the forest, finding it lit by scattered hellfire. In the center, a demon of the old world unfurls its wings, welcoming you to your last breath.
How crunchy is your play? I might ask, how crunchy are the systems you play? That seems a bit disingenuous, as most of us modify systems as soon as we get our hands on them. Play is the thing. As we always say, how detailed do the mechanics of your play get? Do you rip out or skip over useless details? Do you add in extra crunch to make a system more complex? Do you gravitate towards high complexity systems? In a recent episode of Hit the Dice, we played Good Strong Hands by Craig Campbell of NERDBURGER GAMES. The resolution in Good Strong Hands is pretty straightforward, and it leads to narrative depth. The processes are straightforward. Good Strong Hands is not crunchy, and the game does not need to be. The system is not the game, but system matters, and systems should convey theme without slowing down or muddying play. How crunchy is your play? Does the crunch enhance your play? Do you need more or less detail? All questions to think about when deciding which system to use.
Welcome everyone to our interview portion of Zero Means You're Dead. We have with us a member of Atlanta's indie TTRPG community, Craig Campbell. Craig's NERDBURGER Games has produced such gems as Die Laughing, Good Strong Hands, and Capers. And we'll definitely want to talk a bit about Capers later on. But let's hear from the creator himself. Craig, can you tell folks about you and NERDBURGER?
Sure. I'm Craig Campbell. I am the owner, lead designer, publisher, wear many other hats at NERDBURGER Games. NERDBURGER Games is basically one person plus a whole bunch of freelancers. I started playing role-playing games in college in 1991. Played for many years, and then eventually, started GMing my own stuff, and house ruling, house designing, all that kind of stuff. Kind of got into all that, and then I got started writing for Living Greyhawk in the first year of that, back in 1999.
I didn't realize that. That will lead into some questions later, actually.
And then that kind of rolled into a variety of freelance jobs for D&D and a little bit of other stuff for those magazines, and then into some bits and pieces of design for various other games. And then there came a point where I was like, my freelancing for D&D had kind of dried up. This was when the kind of 4th edition was winding down. Okay. And 5th edition was, kind of in internal play testing, and they weren't doing as much stuff on the magazines, and they weren't doing as much in the way of releases. Most of the books that they did in those last few years were kind of story driven and not so much crunchy stuff. Right. And I was like, well, maybe I can make a game. So that's where it shifted to. And then that ultimately spawned my first game, Murders and Acquisitions, and that made NERDBURGER Games a thing, and then off and running. And this year is 8 years for NERDBURGER Games.
What was your first RPG that you played?
The very first RPG that I played was a session of a Ravenloft game, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition in 1991. It was the end of college, like the last week or so before I went home for the summer. And my friend Brian said, "Hey, I think you'd like this game." And so we played Ravenloft, and he specifically chose Ravenloft because he knew that I was a horror fan.
Okay.
And so he's like, "Okay, we'll onboard him with a horror game."
Yeah.
And and so I played one game, and then I went home for the whole summer, and I had no gamer people around me because I was in a little town in northeastern Wisconsin. And so I bought the books at a bookstore and just kind of devoured them all summer long, and then went back, and then through college gamed more and more and more, and kind of went from there. But it all started in Ravenloft, actually.
That's fantastic. When was the next game that you played? Maybe is a good question. Other than D&D.
Yeah, we played a bunch of second edition D&D with that group, with Brian and other folks. And I think the next game that we played was the same group of players. We played some Shadowrun, second edition back in the day. And then there's just like a little one shot of this and that, just trying out some weird stuff. Like we played Toon one time, if anybody remembers that game.
Yep.
And eventually there was a transition into World of Darkness stuff in the early 90s, Vampire in particular. And the game that I became it became my go-to game to run was Deadlands. Because I'm also a Western fan, and it's got that horror element and kind of campy, goofy humor. So that's kind of where the bulk of my gaming was in the first 10 or so years of gaming.
That's very cool. Yeah, a lot of people.
Star Wars. We played a ton of West End Star Wars.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Forgot about that.
Yeah, that's another one that comes up pretty often. People's early gaming. So you talked a little bit about the design bug, how you got into that. Was there anybody in particular when you were looking to design that you reached out to, someone you'd work with, or someone you got advice from, or a group, or anything like that?
The advice mostly came like before the actual game design on Mergers and Acquisitions began, because I had been doing all of this freelancing, and in particular, I had worked quite a bit with Bart Carroll at first at Wizards. He was kind of my contact and developer for the first run, the chunk of stuff that I did. And then eventually Chris Sims as well. And then kind of in the last handful of things that I did, which were mostly adventures for Dungeon Magazine, my developer was Chris Perkins. And Chris Sims, is in other areas and things now. Chris Perkins is still at Wizards and is like, one of the, perhaps best known of the R&D folks so I worked with Chris quite a bit the last few years where I was. And so I gleaned a lot of things from them as far as game design and developing like all the different component pieces. Like I would do stuff that was character class kind of, writing adventures, and there was monster design and all of these things. And I kind of picked up on all sorts of little things about that from a D&D sort of perspective, from like end of third edition and into fourth edition perspective. Right. But in the process, kind of picked up all sorts of other little things too, just like game design ideas in general, and had a lot of discussions about like, why we're doing things the way we're doing them in D&D and in these magazine articles and so forth. And then even dipped my toes into, for a couple of the later adventures, Chris asked me to write the art orders, since I knew the adventure very well. So I wrote art orders, and then they, kind of tweaked them a little bit to give them to the artist. But I got my first, opportunity to like communicate with an artist, and had some talks with some editors as well to kind of glean some wisdom from some of the longtime editors.
Did writing the art orders, is that something that was really beneficial, or has been beneficial down the line? Because right now I'm mostly like, hey, can you make an art thing for me?
Well, it gave me a certain confidence to doing art orders for the first game for Mergers and Acquisitions. And then over the course of time, I've refined. I think my art orders are better written now than they were, 7-8 years ago. And I think I've also developed relationships with certain artists that I've used over and over, where, like if the artist knows the game and, has worked on the game quite a bit, I don't have to necessarily tell them as much stuff. I don't have to be as specific. Like Beth Varney is the artist for all the Caper stuff. Okay. And so when I got to doing this last supplement with Beth, it was, the art orders are very slim compared to what they once were in the first few games, where I got very explicit because I was describing, like, we had to kind of communicate this 1920s world and what the game is going to look like and what the superpowers are going to look like when they're active. And so there's a lot of that. And then, like, the art orders on this last supplement were like, I want to see 4 or 5 characters in a fight, include this power that should look like this, and then vary the genders and ethnicities. Like, gotcha. I don't, I wouldn't necessarily call out some of those things as explicitly as I used to, because Beth knows that, like, I want to have a book that's got, like, a wide variety of character types represented in the artwork. So certain things I'll specify, but then other ones I'll be just like, fill in the gaps and, like, do all sorts of different things.
Was that something that you decided from the get-go? Like, I want to represent a diverse crowd of players or characters, I guess, or was it something that sort of came to you later?
It was there a little bit right from the first game, where I, like, explicitly called out certain art orders. I wanted to, like, make sure we had an elderly character in here, and make sure we've got a character in a wheelchair in here, and a character. There's a little person in one of the illustrations in Murders and Acquisitions, and hitting different races and ethnicities and so forth. So I kind of hit on that right from the start, and it has been something that I've tried to incorporate as much as possible, to the extent that the game allows. Because, like, if you're a game that it's mostly fantasy creatures, then you don't have so many humans to show, but you can show variations in skin tone and hair and things that might happen in body type, that might come out of, even if it's not humans.
Right.
Then you've got things like Code Warriors, which is your programs inside of a computer, and, like, everything's, like, just nothing looks right. They're humanoid, but that's the extent of it.
Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Living Greyhawk, because I too started cutting my teeth a little bit on adventure writing as in Living Greyhawk in 2003 on, and eventually I was one of the triad for the Jeff region, the Mid-Atlantic. Tell folks a little bit about Living Greyhawk, and how did you get into that, and how did you what modules did you start off with?
Well, there was only one. It was in that first year. I was living in Milwaukee at the time, and my regular GM was, at the time, pardon the name drop, Jason Bowman, who is the creator of Pathfinder, and still works at Paizo and works on Pathfinder and everything there. But at the time, we were both architecture students going to school in Milwaukee, and he and a couple other people in Milwaukee became the triad members who kind of ran the High Folk region, which was Wisconsin was High Folk. And the first year of Living Greyhawk, to kind of kick it off, instead of having 8 modules for the year for the region, which is normally what they did later on, they had 12. Yep. And so the 3 of them wrote a lot of the modules, and they farmed out literally the last module, the, like, first year module 12 for the High Folk region. Jason asked me if I would like to write it.
Nice.
And so I came up with an idea, and I wrote a little thing, and I got paid like $50. And wrote an adventure called Winter Tears.
Awesome. Was it a one-off High Folk, or was it part of their greater storyline?
It was essentially a one-off, but it had a thing that happened in it that became an ongoing arc that they kind of played into in later years. It was, the characters had to help a dryad relocate her tree, because it was in this forest that all the evil of Ayus was kind of floating into the area and kind of creeping into the forest. Right. And the dryad was in love with this ranger who had gone off to procure a magic item that would allow her to relocate her tree. But that ranger who was going to save her got captured by a monster, and the characters had to go rescue him. And so they rescued the damsel in distress by rescuing her rescuer and got them out of there. But in the process, they meet like this little impish fellow who I think his name was Bargle is what I named him. And he was like kind of secretly an agent of Ayu's, who would give them information in exchange for their soul. And we had a little contract that was part of the module document that was like, so and so, and you write in your character name, your you as the player name and your RPGA number, so they could track this. Do hereby, bequeath my soul to our, Bargle or whatever his name was, and date it and everything. And so anybody who agreed to give over their character's soul for some information that would help them in the module had to sign that thing. And then they paid it off like years later.
Oh,
like
nice.
They let everybody like there were events that they did, like whatever the big Wisconsin event was at that particular year. They said, okay, everybody who like they sent emails or something. They've somehow got word out to all the people who had signed their soul away and said, we've got a special event for you to get your soul back.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. For folks who didn't play Live in Greyhawk, that went on a lot, right? Some of the best regions. I know we did a lot of that in Jeff. Eric and Brad and Mark when they were the triad there. And then we tried to continue that sort of thing after once I became triad and some others as well. But yeah, so you would have this adventure record sheet, the AR as it can be called, and all sorts of weird stuff would end up on the ARs. You could get signed and make use of it. But it's interesting to me because I only started designing them or writing the modules, like I said, around 2003. There was a formula, right? Like 3 combats or X number of combats and encounters and stuff like that, so you could get the full experience. Did you have to adhere? Do you remember if you had to adhere to that, or was that as big a deal in year one?
I don't recall that being an issue in year one, or at least not for my adventure. It was, I remember having a discussion about like making sure that there's, some amount of combat or there's a fight with this monster that kidnapped the guy. So that's going to probably be a fight, but there was a way you could technically like lure the monster away and do other things too. So, and there were potential other combats that you would get into, but it wasn't I made sure that there was the possibility of there being combat for groups that wanted to be like, okay, well, every problem is a nail, and so we are a hammer, and so we'll just beat the crap out of whatever needs to have its crap beaten out, and that's how we'll win the story and complete the quest. But it wasn't that specifically defined.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, because later on we'd be like, you have to have this many combats, so you can get this much experience, and make sure you have an RP encounter, so it's worth 50 experience points.
Yeah, make sure all the characters are moving along at a pace.
Yes. Yeah, it became a little bit formulaic. Speaking of process, can you talk a little bit about your process for creating a game?
Well, what like the whole deal kind of start soup to nuts.
Yep.
It comes out of an idea, and I think a lot of designers have, a very long list of ideas, and only a handful of them actually get developed into anything. And then of those, only a smaller portion yet actually become games. Right. And so, I've got a big long list of ideas, and it usually is like just getting some bullet points and ideas down for like how this game might play. Like what might the mechanics be like? Like what are the characters doing? What's the ultimate goal of the stories that you're telling? Is it a big scale, large scale kind of thing? Is it going to be a big book? Is it going to be like a little zine idea that's something I can do in like 30, small book pages? And then start just like letting that kind of fill out and expand out and see where it goes. And there comes a point where I've got enough ideas in place where I might get it to a level that I've got just enough written, and it's usually not even properly written. It's like bullet points of like, here's how the rules play. Here's what the characters do. Here's what we're going to see for these are like the challenges and obstacles they're going to overcome. Here's what the game is kind of about. If there's subtext to it, like here's what the game is really about. Whereas, some games are about a thing, but they're really about something else. Right. If you look under the hood. And just get a chance to kind of try that out, like an alpha test, just to see if it feels like it has legs. That's the term I always use in my head is like, does this have legs? Can it go somewhere? I literally have one of those happening tomorrow. I'm having a very first ever play test of a game to see like if this is like, ooh, does this need this just going right back into up on the shelf and I'm not going to touch it again? Or is this something that needs some refinement, or does it feel like it's, I can move forward with like what I'm planning right now? Right. And then like when I'm developing the game, there's usually a series of questions I'm trying to answer, which is to say like, what is the game about? What do the characters do? What is the world like? what is the play experience that I want the players to have, which is distinct from the experience that the characters might have. Might be similar, but can be very distinct. And then what are mechanics that support as much of those other things as I can.
Okay.
And that's just, from my point of view of like, I develop my own game mechanics.
Right.
There's certainly all sorts of ideas borrowed from other mechanics, but
sure.
I haven't done like a D20 game, and I haven't done a Fate game or that sort of thing. And then just, slowly build on that and see where everything goes. And then it becomes, develop enough to give it to playtesters while they're playtesting. Now I'm developing more to flush it out. So like there's more character options, more setting information for them. Right. I might be writing adventures, or I might just be giving them outlines of like, these are the types of things I want you to test. Like run a bunch of combats, or run a bunch of social situations, or, explore the world. Let's see if that's interesting. I give you a whole bunch of setting information, like, let the characters explore it. And we'll have questions in the feedback form that are all about like what the players found interesting, what needs more development, those sorts of questions.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then do that all along, and then you get into the, once it starts to come together, and then you start to get into the publishing end of things, and it starts to become fine tuning and artwork and graphics, and figuring out what kind of format, what form it's going to take, right, when you put it out into the world.
So you typically use Kickstarter. Have you considered using other crowdfunding?
Did the supplement for Die Laughing, which is called Die Laughing 2, Die Laughinger. I did on BackerKit just to test out BackerKit, because it was a very small supplement. I knew I wouldn't need a lot. I figured, if I can, as long as I can kind of cover making this thing, I'd just do a small little project, just to test that out. And it funded it. It made money to the extent that I needed to kind of cover the expenses of making the thing. But not so much that I felt like, oh, this isn't another viable route for me. For an indie creator, a small press publisher who relies a great deal on people finding a game for the first time, never having heard of me, or only maybe having heard of Nerdburger Games, but they don't have any games. Right. Like, I need the biggest audience possible, and that's at Kickstarter right now. Yeah. The creators and the companies that are out there who have like a really solid big fan base are much better suited to using BackerKit or GameFound or any of these other methods, because they're going to have a big fan base that shows up. Right. Whereas I do have a fan base that shows up. It's just not necessarily a big one. Right. Right. Like the Kickstarters that have done the best were surprises.
Oh, okay.
They were surprises because it's like, oh, a whole bunch of people happened to find this because it was just the right thing at just the right time, that sort of thing.
Is there one that was like a really big surprise?
Secrets of the Vibrant Isle was a surprise. That did like 800. That was, I think, my biggest Kickstarter. When the pandemic happened, and that kind of coincided with this run of solo games, and the solo game movement getting kind of big, and also people experimenting and doing all sorts of different things. And I decided, I'll make a solo game, but I'll do not like a journaling game. It'll have a journal. You can journal in it if you want, but it's more of like an adventure game. It plays a little bit more like choose your own adventure, kind of, sort of. And I put that together, and that came, and kickstarted that. I think it hit at just the right time.
Yeah. There are some of your games that are really kind of geared towards either short play or even just single session. Where did the desire to make games like that come from? Was that something that you played, or?
It's my design from going from project to project. There's always a certain level of like a challenge. Like, I'm challenging myself to do this thing. Like, the first game was like, let's just make a game. Then Capers was like, let's make a game that uses playing cards instead of dice. And then Die Laughing was like, let's do a GM-less game. And so I was just trying all these different things. And so just by that, the nature of that approach, you end up hitting like solo games and big games and little games. And, you do all sorts of things. And then, kind of as I developed what Nerdburger does, and kind of it got an identity as a company, I found myself like, having a big game that has supplements and you can play long campaigns in is great. And there'll be people who will latch onto that. And Capers is like that's the game for that. Like
Yep.
people play capers for, months and months, many, many sessions. They have a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of supplements. But, I'm in competition with a lot of games by big companies, well-known games, well-known designers that get a lot of, that are, big books, lots of supplements, get a lot of play, and people play campaigns. So the idea of having, here's a game that you can play that is geared to be a one shot, or here's a game that, you can play a few sessions, or you can play a one shot easily enough, becomes a good niche to kind of be in, because like everybody, like a lot of groups out there are looking for like, oh, let's have a little change of pace. We're in between campaigns, or we're at a stopping point and the GM wants to take some time to kind of prep for the next story arc or whatever. We'll play some of this little game, or we'll, play a 3-shot of this or a 1-shot of that. And there's some of those games play very well at conventions. Die Laughing does incredibly well at conventions of all sizes. Because it's a wonderful 2-hour one-shot, can tell a whole story with a big table full of people. It's easy to learn. It started out as like trying a lot of different things, but then it became like an identity, because I'm looking to kind of fill niches where people can find these games. Like if I did nothing but like campaign worthy games, it's going to be like, here's a big 300-page book, and then here's another big 250-page book, and I'm going to have all these supplements, and I'm going to support it, and it's going to be new products every year, and it's going to run for 8 years. That's a particular approach, and you have to find a fan base that's interested in going down that path with you, which can be hard as small press. So the variety, I think, is what helps, like, people who want to play a solo games, like, oh, Nerdburger Games has a cool solo game, and they have some GM-less stuff, and they have these little zine games that are really light and easy to learn. And so the variety kind of became part of the identity of the company.
How was your Gen Con? And do you think that Gen Con serves the indie community well, poorly, not at all?
I had a good Gen Con, had a good location, had a good traffic at the booth. Did about what I did last year as far as sales. Had more events in the game room this year than I had last year, although I had a few that kind of didn't go off because there weren't enough people that signed up. So I think I might have overshot just a touch a number of events. So I'm finding the sweet spot. I think the toughest thing when it comes to Gen Con for small creators is it's just hard to get people to stop at your booth sometimes. People show up to Gen Con, and there's all sorts of people, all sorts of different types of people. They're all looking for different things. So you get people that come through and they walk the hall, and half of the hall is big booths of all these really well known. And they've got new releases that people are there to get, like, here's the new thing here, and here's the new thing there. And sometimes, indie creators and smaller creators sometimes have like new releases, but it's usually just like, this is what happens to be premiering at Gen Con this year, even though it's been out for a few years, or it's been, we kickstarted it. So some people got it that way. So they don't need to come to, pick it up at Gen Con because they got it through another avenue. Right. And it's not like specifically like this thing is available here for the first time. It's not available, hasn't been available anywhere else. Right. Because, and it's hard for me to do that because I have to just, since I'm doing this in my spare time, basically, this is a side gig, I have to just, like, when I can kickstart, I can kickstart.
Yeah.
And I can get it into people's hands. And so, like, to kickstart it and say, okay, and now everybody has to wait till Gen Con so I can premiere it. Like, I don't want to do that. People are excited about the game now. Right. Let's get them the game now. Yeah. And I think Gen Con does a decent job of supporting indie folks. I asked to be moved to kind of a general area. I wanted to have my booth be like, can you put me as close as you can to the Indie Game Developer Network booth? Because I've been an Indie Game Developer Network member for many years. And I've had my games on sale through their booth for many years, and before I got, started having my own booth. And I know that people are going to show up there and they're going to know, like, hey, we came by here a couple of years ago in Nerdburger Games, blah, 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 blah. And like, oh, they're right over there. They can direct people to me easily. And I got lucky and they put me like right in the same aisle, just farther back in the hall. I would have been happy to be in like that third of the dealer hall, like that on that end. And I ended up like right in the aisle. So I can't really complain because like I was as close as I was going to get to the IGDN booth. So they were very accommodating, and they've been very cool about letting me have my events in the IGDN game room, even though they're getting the games are listed under Nerdburger Games,
Right.
which means that they go toward things that benefit me as a company by having more events. There's priority points that people earn, and that helps you with different things down the road as an exhibitor. And they've always had been great about the IGDN having their own game room and having this booth that has now not moved. It's always in the same spot. Like it's similar to like when you go to Gen Con, where Paizo is going to be because they're always in the same spot. Right. There's a few other game companies that are like that. They're always in the exact same spot, and the IGDN has become that. So that's supporting an indie game cooperative, like a trade organization, which is great. But there's always plenty of struggles. There's always little things that just make it harder. You talk to anybody in tabletop games, and a great many of them will tell you that it is very hard to make a living in tabletop games. And a lot of the people who are indie and small press aren't making a living. Right. Or if they are barely doing it, or maybe they have a spouse that has a regular job that's how they get their health insurance. And so right. that they got that luxury. I've remarked so many times to people on my Discord and in person and so forth, that there's like every single thing about being small press is hard. Every single thing. There is nothing that is easy or even moderately okay. Right. And so it's just you have to pick and choose your struggles and what you're going to try to do to try to get some sort of a benefit that's going to help the company and help sales and help get events, tables full and get word out and get people on your mailing list and coming to your Discord and backing your Kickstarters and everything else that comes along with it. So Gen Con has been pretty solid with all of that stuff to the extent that they can, because it's a huge convention and they have to serve a lot of different types of exhibitors.
True. Yeah, very true. What about your experiences with small conventions? I know you've been to Multiverse and Jordan Con here locally. I don't know what other small cons you've been to. What's been your experience in general with the smaller conventions?
I've gone to quite a few in the Atlanta area and kind of in the 4 to 5 hour drive range, stuff in Chattanooga and Knoxville and stuff like that. And I have found that to go into booth, to have a vendor booth or a table at a smaller convention, some of this is, I think, probably general information. It would apply to kind of anybody going to booth with tabletop games. And some of it is just me personally. It can be very nice because it's usually relatively inexpensive for the table. And if it's in your hometown, I don't have to get a hotel room. I don't, I can just drive back and forth. I can eat at home. I don't have to go to restaurants, a bunch of stuff. Right. So that's beneficial. And even going to conventions that are 3, 4, 5 hours away, not necessarily too bad, because it's usually not in really, really big cities. So like the hotel rooms aren't too bad, and you're not flying, so that's good. It's just a drive. And again, the booths tend to not be terribly expensive, but getting somebody to come along to have like one person help at the booth can be a challenge. To even just have somebody that can come and be there for a couple hours in the middle of the day so that I can go use the restroom and get something to eat. For very small conventions, long booth hours, long vendor hall hours are really tough for me. This is a personal thing. Like I've gone to small conventions that have 8 and 9 hour Saturdays at a convention that has less than 500 people. And when I'm sitting in that vendor hall, I'm spending most of my day waiting for people to come to the table, because it's just too many hours that you're not going to fill up the traffic in that vendor hall. And I understand why these conventions do it, because they want to give maximum opportunity to the attendees to be able to do the events that they want and then go to the vendor hall when they have the time. So you give them long vendor hall hours, but it's really tough for vendors when you're selling something that is only going to be a portion, like only a small percentage of the people who are there are necessarily there for, which tabletop role-playing games often are. Like if I go to a convention that is like, if it's a gaming convention, there's games, and now you chunk out 75% of that because that's board and card games.
Yeah.
And now this 25% is RPGs.
Right.
Is it so? Of that 25%, you've got a chunk of it is going to be at big cons. It's going to be booths for big games, or it's going to be like the local comic shops that carry the big games. They're going to have their booth. So people that are going to buy games from like the 20 biggest companies. So you shrink that bubble a little smaller, and now you're down to this little area, this little chunk of like the indie small press people. And if the convention is not gaming, and it's a comic convention or a fandom convention or an anime convention that has some gaming in it, then the bigger bubble outside of that is the fandom or the anime or the comics, and then there's like this little gaming thing that's smaller, and now you get rid of all the tabletop, all the board game and card game, and you're talking just role playing. It's tough because it's a very small. Like I've done it twice. I've gone twice to MomoCon in Atlanta. For those not in the know, MomoCon is a 40,000 person plus attended anime convention with a big gaming area and a very wide variety of vendor halls, a big vendor hall with a wide variety of exhibitors.
Yeah.
And I don't do well because I'm not anime. Right. I'm not board games and card games. I'm just like this little RPG thing. So there's only a very small percentage of that 40,000 people that are going there that would be interested in tabletop role-playing games. And many of them don't even know I'm there because they don't make it to that part of the vendor hall, or they don't go to the vendor hall at all because they don't have the money to spend, or just whatever. Right. So just going to the local conventions, if they're not strictly gaming conventions, going to smaller conventions can be tough, and because there's a lot of time that gets spent up front prepping to go, and then getting there, loading in, setting up, then breaking down, getting out, and doing all the follow-up afterwards, and restocking and dealing with sales tax and all this other stuff that you do, right? And doing all that stuff when you're going to sell $400 worth of books in 3 days is tough. So if you're going to do something like that, you need to be like, okay, I'm going to go do this, but I'm going to go in fully realizing and expecting this is not going to be a profit convention for me. This is going to be an advertising convention for me. This is going to be just get the games in front of people, get the company name in front of people, and try to do some of the other convention stuff outside of the dealer hall myself, so that I can go and just like do the geeky thing at the geeky convention. Which is harder when the vendor hall hours are longer. So that can be the kicker there too. It's every single one is different enough. Every single convention, small convention, is different enough that you have to weigh all these little factors of like, how am I going to approach this? What's going to be my expectation?
Have you ever seriously contemplated going to something like UK Games Expo, like that, to see if the Brits would enjoy some Nerdburger games?
That would be one of those, like, I would have to go in there with an expectation of, I'm going to spend a whole bunch of money, and this may not get me anything other than just having my banner out in front of a bunch of Brits for 4 days, right? Because getting the stock there, and not knowing how much you might sell there. So like, well, you don't want to run out if you can avoid it. So you send a little more, but then you don't sell as well. So now you got a whole bunch that you got to bring back. If you go to big conventions, with veterans, you talk to veteran attendees, that like Sunday's the day to go to the exhibitors that are looking like they're low on stock, like they're almost out of some stuff, because they might be looking to sell that stuff at a little discount just so they can, like, if we can get the more we can get rid of, the less we have to ship back, the less cost that it's going to cost us to freight this back to our warehouse or whatever. And so we'll take the hit on the cost and sell it for a little cheaper, but we won't be having to spend money to ship it. So how do you handle that when you're going to ship a half a pallet of stuff overseas.
True. Yeah.
That's the real killer. I don't know. Could Nerdburger Games show up there and do gangbusters? It absolutely could. It could be like people could walk in there and be like, holy crap, this is brand new. Look at all these games. This is great. And it could be a complete bust and just be a huge money sink.
Right.
And there's no way to know until you do it.
Yeah, sure.
I imagine it's got to be like that's got to be the harrowing experience that people outside of the US, people like companies in Europe, when they come to Gen Con for the first time, they have to think, it's Gen Con, it'll do great. We'll do gangbusters. It's Gen Con. It's got 70,000 people or whatever, and then they get there, and that first year is maybe.
Yeah, right.
Nobody knew where they were there. Nobody knew who they were. Like, maybe how many years do you got to do it before you really get you get recognized and become kind of an institution at the convention.
Right.
Yeah.
I would imagine you'd have to commit to at least a couple years just to see, right, if that was going to be something that would be viable for you, right? You'd
have to do it 2 years in a row for sure, I would think. Yeah. You want to go there once so that people see, oh, you're here, and then go back again and have people come back and say, oh, you're here again.
Right.
And then you get enough people saying, oh, you're here again. And then they start to think, oh, you're always going to be here. And so I'm going to always come back and check you out.
Nice. Yep.
But, that's an overseas flight and shipping your freight and not just your stock. Like you got to ship everything for the booth, like you got to have, you got to have your luggage, your banners and your table runners and all your little standees and all, everything. You got a whole crap ton of stuff that's got to go that way. And there's certain small stuff that you can pack in with your luggage, but there's going to be big stuff that's got to go on that freight pallet too.
Things people don't think about when they decide they want to design a game. We got a couple minutes left. Can I talk to people about Capers? It's kind of the one game I think a lot of people I know you by. How did Capers come to be, and what has led you to put Capers in all the different iterations that it comes through?
Sure. Well, Capers is a super-powered game of gangsters in the Roaring 20s. So it's super-powered, like 1920s Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, all those folks, but with like street-level superpowers. So it's a gangster game. It's every iteration of Capers is essentially cops and robbers with superpowers. Right. And it came initially out of thinking about like what I want to do for a new game and just like, again, bouncing those ideas and just throwing ideas onto a list. What happened first was I started to think like maybe a supers game, but I don't want to do like a classic Silver Age or Golden Age supers game. There's like 20 of those. There's the competition. It needs to be something that kind of has a hook. And so I toyed around with a few different ideas. And one of the ideas was to set it in a period of history and have that be kind of the interesting hook that makes it a little different. And I was rewatching Boardwalk Empire on HBO.
Okay.
And the idea popped in my head. I remember this specific idea, and I've said this before, was what if Al Capone was not just strong and tough, but super strong and super tough? What if Lucky Luciano was actually like preternaturally lucky, like was able to manipulate probability? And that, slowly kind of blossomed into that idea. And I thought I'm a big, like I told you earlier, I'm a big Deadlands fan.
Yeah.
Ran Deadlands for a long time. And Deadlands uses playing cards, the old school, original Deadlands in particular, uses playing cards for a number of different parts of its game mechanics. And so I thought, well, can I do a game that is all playing cards? Because, it's prohibition, it's organized crime, it's illegal gambling. So the playing card thing kind of fit. And so I built that out with the intention of that being a single one and done game. Here's a hardcover. It's the players and the GM's guide together. And then I was flabbergasted during the Kickstarter to have people asking me if I was planning to support the game with supplements. And I was like, well, I had not thought of doing that. This was only my second game at the time, keep in mind. And Murders and Acquisitions basically broke even. And And so I was like, well, maybe. And so I brainstormed ideas about what I could do with supplements. And that's where I hit on the idea of progressing through, like developing a storyline that passed through the ages, and like have a 1940s game that's kind of crime noir, and a 1960s game that's sort of super spies and super villains and gadgets and things too. I put out a poll to the Kickstarter backers about, like, would you be interested in seeing supplements for this game?
Sure.
And that was a gamble. A lot of what I do is a gamble, actually, but that was a gamble because I was asking people who had not seen or played the game,
Right.
would you like more of this thing that you know very little about?
Right. Yeah.
And at first to have them say yes, and then have them really mean it, and not just be supportive. Right. Like they just, like, some people will be like, yeah, like, you know, I just want to support you. Like you want to make it, go ahead, go for it. Right. And so I thought, okay, well, I had an idea for 3 supplements, and so I did the first one, and it did well enough to be like, okay, we'll do another one. And then the second one did well enough to do a third one. And then the third one did well enough to get itself made. And I was like, that's it. But then it kind of got iterated into some other things. I did like this little PDF thing called Capers Pirates, which is just cops and rubbers on the high seas with superpowers.
Right.
And then ultimately decided, you know, I had this idea in my head for like a 100-year timeline from the 1920s to the 2020s, right, and having Capers Cyberpunk be like this alternate version of the 2020s, where the mega corporations have risen largely off the exploitation of people with powers. And did that game, kickstarted that last year, published it earlier this year. And now I'm doing one supplement to the 1920s game that's just an expansion of the 1920s original game. That's kind of my... it's the love letter to the fans. Okay. It's like, here's one last hurrah. All of the other ideas I had, all thrown into a supplement book. Like, here's all the other powers I never got around to doing. Here's like some more setting material that we never got around to exploring. And just, and some other things.
I highly recommend Capers. It's fun. Well, I think that we're out of time for today. Craig, thank you so much for being with us today. Any last things that you want folks to know about? Where they can find Nerdburger, where they can join the Discord?
If you go to nerdburgergames.com, there's link buttons up at the top, and one of them is for the Discord, so you can get to that. The games are all at DriveThruRPG. I am Nerdburger Craig on various social medias. If you are planning to go to PAX Unplugged, Nerdburger Games will have a booth there in Philadelphia in early December. I don't know what booth number it is yet, but I'll be there. That's those are the big points of what's coming up.
Awesome.
The world of reverie is in need of heroes. A faceless, malevolent entity known only as the Void threatens to destroy your world. Will you heed the call? Good Strong Hands is a darkly whimsical, rules-light role-playing game about saving your fantastical world. You play one of a variety of fantasy beings or a human ally drawn from Earth, working to stop the destruction of your beloved home. Characters are summarized in 2-page playbooks, and the GM can draw upon streamlined 2-page story schemes to guide you in adventure. With these tools, the players and GM work together to build your personal world of reverie as you tell stories of friendship, teamwork, self-empowerment, overcoming harmful forces, and dealing with a world in crisis. However, as your character proves themselves a hero, the Void notices and tempts you with fell powers called corruptions. Will you stay true, or will you walk a line just this side of destruction yourself? Reverie needs your good, strong hands.
I am playing the red cap, Alex, with 2 X's. I have a lot of alimony I pay out because I've got 2 X's. And Alex's fears are beetles. He doesn't like beetles because they got that thing going on. And he doesn't like mustaches. Beards are fine, right? Beards, but he doesn't like mustaches.
I am playing the imp Penny Pranquist, and her fears are cold and darkness. Doesn't like to be cold, and she doesn't like to be trapped in the dark.
Hi, I am playing Flicker Booty, the pixie, and I'm very curious, and I like to look in. If there's something to look into, I'm going to look into it. And I mean, like boxes, caves, whatever. If there's an in, I'm going to look in. And my fears are bugs, because I'm only a foot tall, so spiders that don't bother humans are really, really scary to me. And storms, because wind, again, I'm a foot tall and I fly, so bad wind blows me away, and so I don't like storms.
I'm playing Beetle, the brownie, and my fears are illness and cats.
Okay, and my name is Enigma Star.
For those unfamiliar, a sylph is a wind spirit.
I fly.
The group of you, who all know each other and have traveled together and spent some time together, are making your way to a on the road, and you're coming close soon to a town called Laylorn on Crossroads. A sofa, just kind of this tattered old sofa that you have sat on in the past, or at least have seen in the past, and it's not terribly well kept. It's lumpy. It's not terribly comfortable, but the mayor is lying on the sofa asleep, and he is kind of thrashing about, and his head is flipping side to side. And he, as you get in there, you can hear just barely, he's saying, no.
Am I still myself, just tiny, or am I actually a firefly?
That's up to you.
Okay, I'm still myself, just tiny.
You're just really little.
With my booty on fire. So I will land on his nose and go, wake up, wake up, wake up.
You land right on his nose, and he's kind of thrashing around in the midst of what appears to be a very bad dream. And you tickle his nose a little bit, and he throws one hand up and just just really hits himself hard in the face in the process. And I need a body check out of you as this gigantic hand comes flying toward your tiny firefly form.
Yikes. Okay. And I'm going for a 4 or better.
I know what the target number is. I'll let you know when you just tell me what you rolled. Anything that's 4 or 5 or 6. If all the target numbers are always 4, 5, or 6.
Okay, 5 and a 6.
5 and a 6. Oh, yeah. Target number was 5 there, so that's a success with a boon. You can dodge out of the way handily. The boon you could even go so far as to quickly transform back into your normal pixie self and catch his hand so that he doesn't slam himself in the face.
I will do that.
And you catch his face, and the rest of you open the door to see the the pixie in a fight with a sleeping man. And Alex, you feel a chill just run right down your spine, and you start hearing little beetle sounds all over the place again. Just beetles everywhere. There's beetles. They're coming. They're up the stairs. They're down the stairs. They're inside your clothing. They're everywhere.
He'll like yawn. He's like, damn it! I need to find me some bug spray.
Why do you need bug spray?
Because the beetles are everywhere.
What? There are no beetles around here.
They're everywhere.
It just seems weird. I mean, I'm wondering if there's some sort of weird magic going on where we've already established that the mayor was in a sort of dream world, right? We sort of established that.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if maybe there's a dream world where our friends are at. If he's hearing beetles, maybe there's a connection. It's a real thin line, and I know that.
Sure.
But
Okay.
maybe.
It's not that thin of a line because in this game you are the hero.
Yeah. And no. The answer is no.
So you talk a little bit with Alex as you're booting this poor brownie up the stairs and
I
asking
don't think
why
he's poor.
why he's kind of freaking out over beetle sounds and everything. And Alex, it's up to you how much you want to mention about what's happened to you outside of the beetle thing. You've already kind of talked about that. It's up to you how much you want to mention about anything that's happened. You've been kind of quiet lately. This is a GM drawing you back in, like.
Right, yeah. Well, when she's like, there are no beetles around, he'll be like, yeah, there are. I've been hearing the beetle sounds since I got to this stupid crossroads. I'm never coming back. I'm never coming back to this town again.
Screw blueberries.
I
don't even like blueberries.
I can see spiders, but beetles?
Yeah, because they play with poop and then they do the pincher thing, and it's ugh.
Elizabeth, you see these two talking, trying to like just discuss what's going on and why Alex is feeling the way he's feeling, and you just experienced something rather strange where you sort of entered and kind of overlapped with Alex. Would you like to do anything with any of that?
Yeah, I'd like to try to mess with Alex by can I fully enter into him?
You can give it a try. Sure. You're going to walk kind of fully into his space, as it were.
Yes.
All right. You walk fully into Alex's space. Alex, you get super cold all of a sudden, right in the middle of your talking with Penny. You Elizabeth, you can hear Alex talking about there's beetles everywhere and this and that and everything else. And you can also hear in his mind, because you can read his mind, you can hear little creepy crawly sounds of beetles running around. And you get the distinct impression that if you said something right now, if you opened your mouth and spoke, that perhaps Alex would hear you.
Yeah, so I'll pause for a moment and then yell boo as loud as I can.
Oh, Alex, give me a heart check.
My players were looking for a new game. They were looking for a new RPG. But I think a new RPG found them.
If you're tired of city crowds, the technology, the speed of modern life, maybe it's time to get away to a place that embraces something tranquil, more traditional. Maybe it's time to visit Ahutiko. In Ahutiko, you will find warm people, stunning views, legendary food, and best of all,
this is Mina Way. I'm not even sure that this transmission's even getting out, but if you're seeing this, don't believe what they're telling you about Ahutiko. It's not safe here. Nothing is as it seems. Can you hear me? Stay away from Ahutiko. And don't come looking for me.
come, stay a while. Ahutiko welcomes all.
X-Crawl is the fast-paced, over-the-top action RPG, pitting your team of professional adventurers against manufactured dungeons, all for the entertainment of the fans watching in person and online. Will your team be superstars with fortune and fame? Or will they be wannabes who fall to the deadly encounters forged by the devious dungeon DJs? Let the games begin.
Zero, but you're dead.